Okay, so for this deep dive, I want you to really try and picture something with me, just for a minute.
All right, I'm with you.
You're standing on a city street, a modern American city, could be anywhere really. San Francisco, maybe Austin, DC. It's getting dark. That sort of blue twilight.
The time of day when everything feels a little unsettled.
Exactly. And you see the glow of phone screens on people's faces as they rush past. You hear sirens, but they're just part of the background noise, like traffic. It all feels completely, utterly normal.
But it's not.
It's not, because walking through this crowd, kind of like ghosts that no one else can see, are two figures. Two of the most diametrically opposed literary giants of the last century.
And that's putting it mildly. On one hand, you've got George Orwell.
Right, the democratic socialist, the guy who warned us about the booth stamping on a human face forever,
Yeah.
the ultimate anti-totalitarian. He's afraid of the all-powerful state.
Yeah. And right next to him is Ayn Rand, the radical for capitalism, the champion of the individual, who warned us that the world would collapse not from tyranny, but from mediocrity and altruism, from the looters and the moochers.
I mean, if they had ever actually met, it would have been a disaster.
Oh, an absolute train wreck. They're usually presented as the ultimate cage match. Who is right? Are we living in 1984, or are we living in Atlas Shrugged? Is Big Brother the problem, or is the parasite state the problem?
That is the standard debate. It's
Yeah.
always one or the other, but that's not what we're looking at today. We're diving into a scenario where they aren't fighting.
A scenario where they're walking together, looking at our world.
This is the terrifying part. They're finding common ground. They're agreeing on what they see.
And the source material for this is a fascinating set of documents by an author named Lev Nimotin. The title is After the Warnings. It's a really interesting structure. There are two pieces. The first is the dialogue itself, this imagined encounter where Nimotin actually writes out the conversation between Orwell and Rand as they observe our world.
And that's the second part.
The second part is called After the Warnings essay. And in that, Nimotin sort of pulls back the curtain and gives a literary review of his own work, explaining why he put these two thinkers together.
So my first question has to be, is this just like intellectual fan fiction? Is it just this clever gimmick?
I had that exact same thought. But Nimotin is very clear in the essay. He says this isn't a political debate. He's not trying to make them into mascots. He calls it an act of attention.
An act of attention? What does that mean?
He's using them as literary minds, as specific diagnostic tools. Orwell had a genius for spotting how language is corrupted to control thought. Rand had a genius for spotting how morality is twisted to undermine achievement.
So he's using their specific talents, their lenses, to look at us.
Precisely. And that brings us to the core mission of this deep dive, which is to get our heads around what the source material calls the hybrid dystopia.
Hybrid dystopia. That phrase really grabbed me because I think so many of us feel like something is deeply wrong, but it doesn't quite fit the old blueprints.
Right. We're not in a full-blown Stalinist state, with gulags and show trials.
But we're also not in a complete societal collapse where the trains have stopped running, like in Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah.
Things mostly work on the surface.
And that's the argument Nimotin is making, that we've ended up in this strange convergence, a place where the collapse isn't dramatic. It doesn't happen with explosions or a military coup.
It happens quietly.
Yes, quietly, through the words we use, through the way we educate our children, and through something the text calls moral disarmament. It's a much more subtle kind of decay.
That quietness is what's so unnerving. So let's start where they start. On the street, just soaking in the atmosphere. This is our first section. Fear without terror.
Right. So Orwell is the first to speak in the dialogue. He's watching the people walk by, looking at their faces, their posture. And he says something very precise. He says, this country is not ruled by terror, and yet it is governed by fear.
Okay, that's a razor-thin distinction. Not terror, but fear. When I think of Orwell, I think of pure terror. The thought police. Room 101. The rats.
Of course. And that's what Nimotin calls vertical fear. It's fear that comes from above, from the party, from Big Brother, from the state. It's the fear that a centralized power is going to physically harm you.
So it's external, you know who the bad guy is.
You know exactly who it is. But in this modern world Nimotin is describing, Orwell observes that the fear is, well, it's atmospheric, it's everywhere. He calls it horizontal.
Horizontal fear.
Yeah.
So it's coming from the people around me, my coworkers, my neighbors.
From everywhere and nowhere at once. It's not the fear of being arrested by the state, it's the fear of accusation.
The fear of accusation. Wow, that really lands.
Doesn't it? The text describes people speaking as if every sentence is a potential crime scene.
That's such a perfect metaphor. It's also completely chilling. What do you do at a crime scene? You don't touch anything. You watch where you step. You say as little as possible.
You weigh every single word, but you're not weighing it for truth or for accuracy or even for humor. You're weighing it for one thing.
Survivability.
Survivability. Will this sentence get me fired? Will this tweet from 5 years ago ruin my life? Will this question in a meeting get me called into HR? It's a constant, low-grade threat assessment.
But let me push back on that for a second. Haven't we always had social pressure? I mean, in the 1950s, people were terrified of being called a communist. How is this fundamentally different?
That's a really important question. And the difference, according to the text, lies in the ambiguity and the pervasiveness of the threat. Rand actually picks up on this in the dialogue. She agrees with Orwell and notes that fear without a clear source is the most paralyzing form.
Right, she says, when men fear a dictator, they can name him.
Yes. If there's a tyrant, you know who your enemy is. You can go home, lock the door, and whisper to your family, "I hate that man." You can maintain your own internal sanity because the source of your oppression is external and identifiable.
But when the fear is horizontal, when it could come from a social media algorithm or a community standards committee or that anonymous person you're arguing with online, who are you supposed to fight?
You can't. It's like trying to punch a fog bank. And because you can't fight it, the text argues that the mind withdraws in confusion.
It's not just that you stop talking, you start to doubt your own sanity.
You start to doubt your own right to even hold an opinion. You think, wait, am I the bad guy here? Is my common sense observation actually harmful or problematic? It's a form of societal gaslighting.
And that leads to a kind of psychological paralysis. You stop taking risks, you stop offering novel ideas, you just want to blend in.
And that blending in, that constant self-censorship, requires a whole new set of tools. Which brings us to their next stop. They leave the street and they walk into a modern office building. They go into a newsroom.
Right. Section 2, the corruption of language. And this obviously feels like Orwell's home turf. This is his thing.
It is. But Nemotin's argument is that the newspeak of our era is very different from the newspeak of 1984.
In the book, the government was actively, cutting words out of the dictionary. It was a top-down, coercive project to make thought crime literally impossible.
It was state-enforced, brutal. What Nemotin describes here is what he calls managerial newspeak. It's not enforced by a guy with a truncheon. It's enforced by professional etiquette, by HR policies, by the culture itself.
It's driven by that same need for survivability.
Exactly. And the text points to a very specific vocabulary. A set of words that have become loaded. Words like safety, harm, equity, context.
On the surface, those all sound like good words. I mean, who doesn't want safety? Who's in favor of harm?
They sound therapeutic, soft. And that's the genius of it. That's the trap. Because Orwell, in the dialogue, points out that these words are no longer being used as neutral descriptors of reality. They've become shields.
Shields. Okay, unpack that mechanism. How does a word function as a shield?
Well, what does a shield do? It blocks an attack. In a conversation, these words block inquiry. They block debate. The moment someone says, "What you just said makes me feel unsafe," the conversation is over.
And we're not talking about physical safety, like a loose wire. We're talking about ideological safety, emotional safety.
Right. And you can't argue with it. If I say, "I disagree with your statistics," you can present counter statistics. We can have a debate. But if I say, "Your statistics are a form of violence that makes me feel unsafe," what can you possibly say?
If I argue back, I'm just proving that I'm a monster who doesn't care about your safety.
You've been categorized as a threat. The argument is over before it began. The text says these words preempt reality instead of describing it. They're a trump card.
The dialogue describes this incredible scene where Orwell and Rand are standing in the newsroom, and it's all very modern, quiet, open plan office, people on Slack. And Orwell is watching the headlines populate on the screens.
And he notices they arrive already softened.
Already softened. I love that phrasing. He sees verbs just dissolving into these vague abstractions. Concerns were raised.
Tensions escalated. Narratives emerged.
It's pure passive voice. Mistakes were made. An officer-involved shooting occurred.
It's language that is designed to strip away agency, to remove accountability. Orwell notes that in these headlines, no one actually did anything. Things just sort of happened. They emerged from the ether.
And he watches the editors talking about the phrasing. They're not asking, is this the most accurate way to describe what happened?
No. They're asking, is this survivable?
Will this wording provoke a backlash? Will this get us ratioed on Twitter? Will our advertisers pull out? He says they negotiate phrasing the way diplomats once negotiated borders.
It's all about managing perception and avoiding accusation. The truth is a secondary or even tertiary concern.
And Rand is watching this same scene, but she sees another layer to it. She connects it to the idea of exhaustion.
This is one of the most powerful insights in the essay. In 1984, the Ministry of Truth had this massive, inefficient job of constantly rewriting the past. They had to physically go back and change all the old newspapers and records.
It's a huge amount of work, an army of clerks.
Immense. But Moten's argument is that our system is far more efficient. We don't need to rewrite the past. We just exhaust it.
We drown it.
We drown it. We are so saturated with information, with 24-hour news cycles, with endless hot takes and contradictory narratives, that memory itself becomes impossible. You don't need to burn the history books if no one can even remember what happened last Tuesday.
That is a profoundly disturbing thought. The end result is the same, a population disconnected from its own history. But the method isn't censorship, it's just noise, information overload.
And that overload leads to something the text calls the rationalizing of contradiction. We get used to it. We become capable of holding two completely opposite ideas in our heads at the same time because we're too tired to fight it.
So that's the world of the adults, the world of media and work. But the dialogue takes a much darker turn when they leave the newsroom. They go to a school.
And this brings us to section 3, education and the quiet barbarism. This is, I think, the most incendiary and, frankly, heartbreaking part of the whole analysis.
So they walk into a modern American classroom, and at first they see these kids who are incredibly articulate. They can talk about, systemic oppression, intersectionality, decolonization. They have the vocabulary of a PhD candidate.
They've mastered the language of social theory. But then Orwell notices something else.
They can't read, not fluently. They struggle with basic text.
Orwell is just horrified. He calls this a quiet barbarism. He says, in his day, keeping the masses illiterate was a deliberate strategy of tyrants. It was a weapon to keep people powerless.
If you can't read, you can't access history. You can't read the laws, you can't organize.
Exactly. But here, he says, this new illiteracy is dressed as compassion.
That's a brutal charge. How on earth is failing to teach a child to read an act of compassion?
The rationale, as the text lays it out, is that we must protect children from the stress and harm of rigorous standards. We don't want to damage their self-esteem by telling them they failed a test. We remove oppressive things like deadlines and correct answers.
So we prioritize their immediate emotional comfort over their long-term intellectual competence.
And the effect is identical to tyranny. You are creating a generation that is completely dependent on others to interpret the world for them. And this is where Rand absolutely explodes.
I could almost feel her rage coming off the page. She calls this moral disarmament.
She is furious. Her line is, cripple the mind early, then tell it the world is unjust. Just think about that two-step process.
It's diabolical.
First, you deliberately withhold the tools of independence. You don't teach them rigorous logic, mathematics, phonics, history. You ensure that they cannot succeed through their own merit and effort.
You break their legs.
And then you hand them a crutch and say, see, it's not your fault you can't walk. The floor is slanted. The whole system was designed to make you fall.
So you transform an educational failure into a political grievance. Resentment takes the place of ambition.
And dependency replaces pride. Rand calls this, flat out, theft. She argues that it is a profound moral crime to rob a child of the tools of reason and independence while pretending you're being kind. It's a form of sabotage that smiles at you.
It's the soft bigotry of low expectations taken to its absolute philosophical conclusion. And the analysis doesn't stop there. They leave the grade school and go to a university faculty meeting.
Right. And here, the target isn't basic literacy. The target is merit itself.
This is a classic Randian theme, the war on the competent. But again, the method is different.
It is. In her novels, the looters hated excellence out of pure envy. Here, the text observes something more subtle. Merit hasn't been logically disproven. No one has successfully argued that bridges built by incompetent engineers are a good idea.
So what happened?
Instead, merit has been declared immoral.
Immoral, the very act of being better at something, of achieving more, is now framed as a moral failing, as a provocation.
Yes. Your success is an insult to those who are less successful. Your A+ is an act of violence against the student who got a C. Excellence creates inequality. And in this worldview, inequality is the cardinal sin.
So this creates a culture where success requires an apology.
The constant apology. You see it everywhere. The text describes this dynamic where you can be successful, you can be wealthy, you can be brilliant, but only if you publicly kneel. You have to performatively apologize for it.
You have to attribute all your success to luck or to privilege. You have to say, I didn't really earn this.
Because if you stand up and say, I earned this, I worked harder, I am more competent, you are implicitly suggesting that someone else didn't work as hard, and that is now an unacceptable thing to say.
The competent person learns to hide, to downplay their abilities, to fly under the radar so they don't get shot down.
Which creates an incentive structure where the safest strategy is mediocrity. Don't stick your head up. Don't volunteer for the hard project. Just do the bare minimum.
Which leads to the terrifying next question. If you systematically punish competence and reward incompetence, what happens to the actual machinery of civilization, the things that have to, work?
And that question takes us right into Section 4, the retreat of authority and the hybrid strike.
So Orwell and Rand are now looking out a window. There's a protest forming in the street below.
And Orwell, with his eye for political machinery, immediately notices what he calls spontaneity with logistics. He sees the matching, professionally printed signs, the pallets of water bottles,
Sure.
the organized marshals. And he says, spontaneity with logistics is never spontaneous.
He knows an organized political operation when he sees one. He's not fooled by the performance of grassroots anger.
But Rand is looking at something else. She's watching the reaction of the authorities. The police are standing down. The shopkeepers are boarding up their windows, as if this is just a predictable weather event.
And her insight is that the state doesn't lack the force to maintain order. It has plenty of force.
What it lacks is moral confidence.
Moral confidence. The belief in its own right to govern.
Exactly. The text calls this permission without accountability. The people in charge, the mayor, the police chief, the DA, they fear accusation more than they fear actual disorder.
It's that horizontal fear again. They're afraid of a New York Times headline calling them brutal. They're afraid of being canceled.
So it's a simple calculation. If they crack down and restore order, they risk their careers. They'll be called fascists. But if they let a few buildings burn, well, that's just people expressing their righteous anger. It's the safer career path to let things fall apart.
So they give permission for chaos because they are terrified of the moral judgment of the activists and the media.
And this erosion of confidence trickles all the way through the system. The dialogue moves to the courts, where they watch judges trying to balance principles that were once considered absolute.
And Orwell sees officials on television, claiming with a straight face that the borders are secure while the live footage next to them shows thousands of people walking across.
He identifies this as doublethink, of course.
Okay.
But he notes a crucial difference from his book. In 1984, believing two contradictory things was hard mental work. You had to actively force your mind to do it.
But here,
He says, there is no embarrassment. The contradiction has lost its stigma. It doesn't even register as a problem anymore.
it's that exhaustion again. We're just too tired to call out the lie. We've seen it so many times it just becomes background noise.
And this is when Rand delivers one of her coldest lines in the dialogue. She says, law without enforcement is not law. It is theater.
It's just a performance. We all pretend there are rules, but everyone knows they only apply to certain people at certain times.
It's a system based on political alignment, not objective principle.
Okay, so if the law is theater and achievement is a sin and language is a minefield, what do the competent people, the productive people, do? In Atlas Shrugged, they all go on strike. They disappear to a hidden valley, to Galt's Gulch.
Right.
I kept waiting for that. For the text to tell us where the new Galt's Gulch is. Is it a different state? Is it crypto? Where are they going?
And this is Moten's most chilling and, I think, brilliant twist on the whole concept. He says there is no valley. There is no John Gulls giving a big speech.
The strike is quiet.
It is quiet. It is internal exile.
Okay, that is a fascinating concept. What does that actually look like? What is an internal exile?
It's a psychological withdrawal. It's disengagement. The text says people don't pack their bags and leave. They withdraw into automation, into silence, into private enclaves. They simply stop caring.
Give me a concrete example.
Okay. Think of a brilliant surgeon in a big hospital system. She sees the bureaucracy getting worse every year. She sees patient care being compromised by new equity initiatives that are more about ideology than medicine.
10 or 20 years ago, she might have fought it. She would have written letters, gone to the board, raised hell.
Exactly. But now, She knows that if she speaks up, she'll be targeted. She'll be called uncooperative, not a team player. Maybe even something much worse. It's a career-ending risk.
So she just shuts up.
She shuts up, she comes to work, she does her surgeries brilliantly, she keeps her head down, and she goes home. She has withdrawn her intellectual and moral energy from the system. She's no longer invested in fixing it. She's just surviving within it.
Or the programmer who sees a catastrophic flaw in a new piece of software, but knows that reporting it means endless meetings with managers who don't understand the technology and will blame him for delaying the launch.
He just says, you know what? It's not my problem. He does the bare minimum to cover himself and lets it ship. They withdraw into silence. They comply on the surface. They go to the mandatory seminars. They use the right jargon. But inside, they've checked out.
That's so much scarier than them all moving to Colorado.
It's terrifying because if they leave, you have a crisis. The lights go out. You know you have a problem. But here, they're still physically present. They're still collecting a paycheck. But the engine of their creativity, their passion, their commitment, it's been turned off.
As Orwell says in the dialogue, systems collapse faster when their most competent participants stop caring.
And the most insidious part, which the text points out, is that for a long time, nothing seems to change. The lights stay on.
The grocery store shelves are still stocked. The internet still works.
The decay is internal. It's like termites eating a house from the inside out. The paint looks fine. The structure looks solid. But it's hollow. And you don't realize it until the first big storm comes and the whole thing just collapses into dust.
And by then, all the people who knew how to build a house have already mentally left the building.
They're gone.
This brings us to the synthesis, the big question. Section 5. When these two dystopias meet, what do we get? Does this world Ayn Rand describes look more like Orwell's nightmare or Rand's?
And the text's answer is unequivocal. It's both. It's the worst of both worlds. It's a hybrid that has taken the most destructive elements from each.
It's the crossover event from hell.
That's a good way to put it. From Rand's dystopia, Atlas shrugged, we've taken the moral condemnation of achievement, the war on merit, the idea that need gives you a moral claim on the productive. We've elevated the parasite and demonized the producer.
And from Orwell's 1984.
We've taken the tools, the manipulation of language, the corruption of reality, the concept of doublethink, where you can say something you know is false with a straight face, the use of words as weapons to shut down thought.
But the essay makes a really important point about the nature of the totalitarianism here. It's not what we expect. We keep looking for a dictator.
We're always looking for the man on the balcony, the single tyrant, the big brother figure. But Ayn Rand's point is that there isn't one. There is no single person in charge of this system.
So who's the enforcer? If there's no Gestapo, no thought police, how does the system maintain control?
The system enforces itself. It's a decentralized network of incentives. Social incentives, professional incentives, moral incentives. The enforcer is the fear of losing your job, of being deplatformed, of having your reputation destroyed online.
The text calls it soft power.
And it argues that soft power is infinitely more efficient than a prison. If the state throws you in jail, you become a martyr. You're a hero to the resistance.
But if the system just makes you unemployable, if it makes you a social pariah...
You silence yourself. You become your own jailer. It's far more effective.
And because it's decentralized, there's nothing to overthrow. You can't storm the Bastille if the Bastille is an HR department in every company and a social media mob that can form in an instant.
It's everywhere, nowhere. It's a self-perpetuating, self-policing ecosystem of conformity. That's the horror of the hybrid dystopia.
There's a line from the essay that has been rattling around in my head since I read it. Civilizations don't die screaming, they die rationalizing.
It's a killer line. Just devastatingly accurate. We have this image of civilizational collapse as, barbarians at the gates and cities on fire.
But the text suggests it's much quieter than that. We die by explaining away the decay. We rationalize every contradiction until there's nothing solid left.
Well, the crime rate isn't really rising. We're just contextualizing poverty. The test scores aren't falling. We're just decentering oppressive forms of knowledge.
The border isn't open. We're just processing asylum claims more efficiently.
We rationalize and rationalize until the connection between words and reality is completely severed. And then the floor just gives out from under us.
Which brings us to the very end of the dialogue, the unresolved ending. In a normal story, this is where the climax would be. Winston is broken in room 101. John Galt finally takes over the airwaves. But here,
Orwell and Rand finish their walk, and they sit down at an outdoor cafe.
And it's normal. People are laughing, families are eating, the coffee is good.
The sheer mundanity of it is the whole point, and that's the final danger. The text argues that because there's no dramatic, obvious crisis, because people aren't starving in the streets or being rounded up into camps, the warning feels abstract.
People look around, they see their iPhone and their Netflix account, and they say, what collapse? Everything seems fine to me.
But the termites are in the walls. The internal rot is proceeding, even if the exterior looks pleasant.
And the dialogue ends with these two final, stark warnings from its protagonists. What's Orwell's final thought?
Orwell's is about language. He says, if words no longer mean what they mean, there is no path back to reality. If we lose our shared understanding of basic terms, we can't even diagnose the problem, let alone fix it.
And Rand.
Rand's is about the mind. She says, if reason is surrendered voluntarily, no constitution can save you. The best written laws in the world are meaningless if the culture has decided that feelings are more important than facts. The paper can't protect you from a collective delusion.
So the whole thing doesn't end with an answer, it ends with a question, a test.
Do we still believe naming reality matters?
Yeah.
That's it. That's the entire battle. It's not left versus right anymore. It's reality versus unreality.
This has been it's been a heavy one, but I feel like it's an essential diagnosis. To recap, we've gone through Levin Moten's After the Warnings and this concept of a hybrid dystopia.
A place where fear comes from your peers, not the state. Where language is used as a shield to stop thought. Where merit is treated as a moral crime, and competence goes into hiding.
It's a picture of a republic that looks fine on the surface, but its core foundations, reason, language, merit, are rotting away.
And using Orwell and Rand as the guides was, I think, a stroke of genius. It gets us past the usual partisan squabbles and forces us to look at the underlying mechanisms of decay. The exhaustion, the quiet strike, the apology for success.
It's not about which ism is better, it's about whether the independent mind can survive.
The sovereign individual, as Rand would say.
So as we close this out, I want to leave you, our listener, with one final thought. It comes directly from that idea of a quiet strike. The text suggests this isn't a future possibility, it suggests the strike is already happening.
That the people who build things, fix things, invent things, and heal things are already withdrawing. Not physically, but mentally.
They are shrugging, but they're doing it from their cubicles. They're still in the room, but they've checked out.
So the question to ask yourself is this: are you one of them?
I mean, really think about it. Have you stopped raising your hand in meetings because it's just not worth the grief? Have you stopped correcting an obvious error because you're worried about the social consequences? Have you, in some small way, withdrawn your best self to ensure your own survival? Are you quietly shrugging?
And the follow-up question is the one that really matters. If all the most capable people withdraw into silence, who is left to keep the lights on?
That's the question that should keep all of us up at night. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. I highly recommend you seek out the source material.
It's a vital piece of work. Stay curious and try to speak clearly.